Hello and welcome to this special broadcast from WION. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the second round of negotiations between Iran and the United States are currently underway in Geneva. Now, after having claimed that Iran's nuclear program had been effectively obliterated after the American strikes in Iran in the month of June last year, the question is obviously this: what aspects of Iran's nuclear program is Donald Trump actually negotiating over this time round? Now, these negotiations, remember, are happening as Donald Trump has also announced that there is a second American aircraft carrier strike group that is now headed to the Gulf to ramp up more pressure on Iran. The Iranians, for their part, have said that they are ready to strike a deal with the Americans, even if it takes days or weeks in these negotiations in Geneva. But the fact of the matter is this: the clock is ticking, especially after Donald Trump's closed-door meeting with Netanyahu at the White House. The stakes appear to be far higher than before. Now, to discuss the fate of these negotiations that are currently underway in Geneva, we are joined by Mr. Burzin Vahmer, who is from the Center for Iranian Studies at the University of London. Mr. Vahmer, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION.
Thank you.
Now, the question that I want to start off by asking you is this. The fact that Donald Trump is trying to pile on more pressure on the Iranians by sending a second aircraft carrier. Now, the Iranians have said that they are not going to buckle under pressure and they will talk only about their nuclear program. Now, in your assessment, do you think, realistically speaking, do these talks, do they have a chance to succeed?
No, I don't believe so. Because Iran talks about talks occurring and procrastination is straight out of their playbook. Mr. Trump's error, insofar as I'm concerned, is that he has not chalked out a timetable for this. And the Iranians labor under the impression that they can pull it through in the next few months, as the US state primaries will start from next month, March, until the midterm elections take place in November 2026. You can argue Mr. Trump wants an electoral hit because he is suffering on other fronts with the financial aspects of the tariffs, which Americans are paying for, 90% of which is happening, and there is disgruntlement even within his MAGA supporters.
Right.
Putting those domestic aspects aside, Foreign Minister Arabchi yesterday met Director General Rafael Grossi of the IAEA, who is still seeking deep technical fleshing out of details from Tehran on what has happened since the 12-day war, because the agency has not been allowed to send in inspectors. And what has happened in the last few months, particularly from November 2025, Mr. Saleh, is what I want to concentrate on now.
Right.
As intelligence and satellite estimates show, Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz remain, for all purposes, largely inoperative. But what has happened since November is new roofing structure has been installed, which makes it difficult for us to see as to what is happening underground. One can only tell from satellite photos above ground, and clearly activity is taking place there,
right,
of which we are not aware. Then there is the question of what Iran doesn't want to talk about and puts out as its red lines. Keeping these talks...
This is a key issue here, Mr. Mahmoud. This is a key issue here because the Iranians have said that they're willing to talk about their nuclear program, but the issue that they are not going to budge upon is their ballistic missile program and their defense capabilities, and also their support for other proxies in the region, which Iran calls its axis of resistance. Now, realistically speaking, do you think Donald Trump's expectation, along with the Israelis, that the Iranians will negotiate and climb down from their position on the ballistic missiles that they have, is that even realistic for Donald Trump to be negotiating here?
Whether realistic or not, it needs to be. And we can keep Israel out of the equation. It is the GCC allies who are particularly apprehensive, even if they are not so voluble as Netanyahu is about the ballistic missile production program, because it directly infringes on their security.
Right.
As Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan even pointed out in not so many words, that we need to find some creative way out of this impasse. And quite rightly, because in the last few months, which I was going to come to tell you, is that while the nuclear resumption of activities has taken less priority, Iran has concentrated on its ballistic missile facilities all of which have been practically repaired since the 12-day war of June 2025. The Sharud solid propellant missile facility has been completely restored, for one thing. At Parchin, the military missile complex facility where they test mounting nuclear warheads on missiles, southeast of Tehran, a suburb of Tehran, a new cylinder has been installed, which is 45 meters long. And as Rafael Grossi would have discussed yesterday with Foreign Minister Arakchi, we would like to have details on that. Then coming back to Isfahan's and Natanz, as I mentioned, a reinforcement has taken place of tunnels and fresh soil has been added. So it means that the Iranians have been down there, obviously, which they have access to, in order to retrieve what they could after damage has taken place and perhaps to conceal something more. But coming back to the missile production, that is what Tehran purports to be its red lines.
Right.
But inevitably, it will have to be brought into discussion because that is of considerable anxiety to Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and others in the region at large.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that the ballistic missile of the Iranians is a considerable concern for the nations of the GCC. But the fact of the matter is the nations of the GCC, the ones that you mentioned, especially Saudi Arabia and Turkey, are asking the Americans to not spark a war that could potentially, set the entire region on fire, because the American allies do not seem to be on board with Donald Trump's plan for Iran. So how can the Americans overcome this challenge of getting their allies in the region on board with them?
Because that is what is publicly put out to us, given that Arakchi, since the 12-day war, has been building bridges across the Arab-Muslim world with visits to Cairo and Riyadh, and there is something of a cordial status quo currently with these governments, and therefore they are asking, you're correct to say, Mr. Trump to stay his hand. And then you must also say, going back to the talks, Iran wants, or it says that it is willing to dial down its enrichment and possibly, repeat possibly, but not for sure, ship out the 400 kilos enriched uranium out of the country, which is going to be a Herculean task in itself, and that's another discussion. Right. But the point is, what are they clamoring for? Sanctions relief. And what will happen is that they keep to this narrow, obsessive focus of only nuclear talks and sanctions relief, because obviously they need access to funds, since their relationship has gone sour with Hezbollah and other proxies who are waiting to be paid up, and to kickstart funding, which of course happened after the JCPOA, when Iran spent about $16 billion on Hamas, Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq and elsewhere. And obviously that is what's happening. And when that happens, because Hezbollah is down and out, as we know, just like Hamas and Houthis, once the payments start trickling back in from Tehran, which are not happening, you can be sure Riyadh, Ankara, and others will change their tune and be putting pressure on Washington to again do something. For now, and this is important to inform your viewers, they are okay with a battered, beleaguered, wounded Iran lying in a corner, and they feel it's not a threat to them. But it will turn the page, and then again, they'll be up in arms about it.
All right, I think you've made a pretty impassioned answer to how you see these negotiations will proceed. But here is the rub of this entire negotiation. The fact is, there was an Iranian nuclear deal. It was called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Donald Trump, in 2018, described it as the worst negotiated deal in American history and unilaterally walked out of it. Now, in case these negotiations succeed, how different do you think this Trumpian deal will be with the Iranians from the JCPOA?
Now, that first needs to be said that Mr. Trump has bones to pick with Obama, which is why he partly walked out of the deal in 2018. That can be factored in. But at the same time, theoretically, the deal did not go far in offering what we wanted, despite the so-called putative cap of 3.67% of nuclear enrichment. Then you have to account for the fact that what about surreptitious sites, like the site 2 miles from Natanz now at Kolan Gazla, the so-called Pickaxe Mountain site that has been discovered in the last few years. Why was that not spoken about at the JCPOA in 2015? There are other such surreptitious sites where secret enrichment work or conversion work is going on, which the Iranians had been mum about. So you have to also mention and note that the JCPOA was not completely copper bottoming all the security guarantees that the regional allies and the EU and the US wanted. And please remember, again, to go back to this main question of the missile production facilities and nuclear warhead research that is taking place, that was never part of the JCPOA, which was its weakest point. That had somehow never been brought up by the Obama administration. And now we are coming to pay the price. And final point, who's paid the price for it? Pakistan, when Iran fired those missiles in January 2024 for 3 days in a row in Pakistan's Balochistan province.
All right, you've raised several important points. We have to wait and watch as to how these negotiations proceed in Geneva. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Burzine Wahmer, for joining us and getting us those insights there.